It's just a jump to the left.
Good boy, Tom Cruise. Why does he run in all of his movies?
This was a Patreon-requested review, and was suggested to me due to the types of media I've covered several times in the past that it thematically crosses with. I'm a big fan of time travel fiction, and by how my show works, I like to talk about adaptations of Japanese media to show the contrast in material from its original form to live action. Edge of Tomorrow is an adaptation of the 2004 Japanese light novel, All You Need Is Kill, by Hiroshi Sakurazaka, better known for Modern Magic Made Simple, which, to coincide with this movie, was remade into a 2-volume manga to visually flesh out the tale.
Both have been imported and translated, and I took a look in prep for this. It's an interesting take in the Groundhog Day time loop scenario that I last discussed with the Commodore Yongo Net movies.
For those not familiar, the Groundhog Day time loop is when you relive the same period of time over and over again, carrying nothing with you but your memories of the prior iterations you experienced. To some, it's the ultimate hell to be trapped within a repetitious moment forever, when to relive a moment you've screwed up is what many wish they could do on their worst days.
Dormammu, I've come to bargain. Dormammu, I've come to bargain. Dormammu, I've come to bargain.
And to others, it's the ultimate challenge of how you escape this trap by learning how it works. It's a really popular branch of time travel fiction. As you could guess from the clips, the scenario is named after the 1980s Bill Murray movie Groundhog Day, since it was the biggest inspiration behind such a loop becoming stuck in popular consciousness, despite it not actually being a science fiction tale. It's more the definition of a high-concept idea. A grumpy jerk being trapped in a town by the loop until he learns to appreciate those around him and his experiences for what they are. And I love that film.
Sakurazaka in turn was inspired by that movie, and an account written by a video game player about how respawn windows in video games permit one to take things like their life from a perspective of trial and error. That failure in a scenario isn't always absolute, if you can just restart to a point before you died and fight over and over until you find a way to succeed. And going into the character's perspective of the played events is a pretty interesting way to look at things.
I guess it's the mystery aspect and how you find the scenario for success that appeals to me, and whether what you've learned from this journey and all the lost timelines and potential lives have left some form of impact upon you. As from the framework of being stuck in a time loop, there is absolutely nothing that prevents you from achieving the best case scenario win condition.
Unless, a fucking asshole cheats using rules he didn't even know existed, and from all other accounts are impossible, or break the setting, and then is just hand-waved away. Oh yes, I can name series that completely fucked this up due to pre-established rules. But anyways, going in, normally this is my wheelhouse for a good time. Less so Tom Cruise movies, which is why this may have passed me by on first release.
Okay, look, I don't find the guy an awful actor. I like him in Minority Report and thought he did fantastic work in The Last Samurai. It's just, he's not in movies I tend to like. The War of the Worlds remake sucked. I haven't found any of the Mission Impossible movies appealing. Top Gun I'm only vaguely aware of. Oh, and apparently there was that one time he tried to kill Hitler!
Really, if it weren't for Scientology and the Oprah interview making the guy a meme, I would have no idea who he was. But as my show often presents, I have weird taste. Thus, let's take a look at the film where its main character dies in the first 20 minutes.
We open on a film reel of future news clips that attempt to serve as exposition for the setting, but utterly failed to do so as they cut away from each relevant clip before they can actually tell you anything.
I have no idea what moron made doing this popular, but what is so difficult in modern cinema with actually setting your story? Doing it this way is both a failure of show, don't tell, and actually explaining things in favor of being artsy. If you need to have exposition at the beginning of a movie for your viewers to understand the movie, actually give them the exposition! I miss Pacific Rim!
I had to go to Wikipedia to make sense of this, but in short, in 2015 a meteorite hit Germany and released upon the planet a hostile alien species that had inhabited it.
They were called worms.
宇宙がちっぽけな落とし物をしたせいで
What, that makes more sense than the name the book and movie gave them, Mimics.
As the mimics, in the movie at least, don't actually mimic anything. They're just a mass of tentacles attached to a head. Sure, they can use several appendages together to form more defined physical structures than just whip-like masses, but they don't actually imitate other entities like, say, Kamen Rider Kabuto's worms do, where they have full control of their own biology and metabolism to the point they can take on new physical forms and make perfect copies of host humans, including their memories. That is an actual mimetic life form, as opposed to space bugs that are the nightmares of Japanese schoolgirls.
Oh, and yes, I have seen enough anime to know where this is going.
These bugs, somehow, multiplied massively over the span of a few years, taking over most of Europe, with the United Nations forces just barely managing to keep them contained, it having reached the point that the mimics have reached the English Channel, and if they escape into the seawater, then there will be no hope of containing them.
But good news! We have really shitty power armor!
Yeah, this was the third sci-fi element that made this source material come up on the adaptation wheelhouse. And the novel had this armor entering into the circulation to permit military forces to combat the raw power of the mimics. Problem is, bar carrying the weight of their weapons and allowing them to survive things like dead drops, which would be suicidal if done with a parachute, this movie's version of the suit is just a bunch of plates and guns linked together by an exoskeleton. This piece of shit overall reduces the wearer's agility to the point that, well, they're pretty much just sitting ducks since the suits do not provide anywhere near enough protection to survive even a glancing blow. It's essentially a coffin with holes in it, in opposition to the novel and manga's version of it, which was a full-ceiling suit of power armor, visually inspired by Master Chief, Halo, and the original novel version Starship Troopers gear that did also enhance their agility and provide a reasonable chance of survival instead of turning people into cannon fodder.
And they don't even have the excuse of the armor being a rush-to-the-field product. Everyone knows how to use this. It has been standard issue against the mimics for a while now, and there is no supply shortage which would restrict them from building something that would allow them more survivability to take down more mimics or come back from the fight. This is a mass-produced product, and excluding the strength enhancement, it's less effective than a flak jacket.
Hell, at several points in the film, the visibility of the characters in the suits leads to them dying when they're trying to play dead. Something that, while not doable in a video game, is a viable tactic in real life that could have been done with a full-ceiling suit, since the mimics do rely on normal sensory input in battle. Anyways, the video clips all have the recurrence of Cruz's character, U.S. Public Officials Officer William Cage.
Obviously, with Tom Cruise being the main character, we weren't going to, well, get the novel's protagonist Keiji Kiriya in here. Nor does this film have any Asian actors despite adapting Japanese source material. But, hey, devil's advocate, they changed a lot of context for this, and All You Need Is Kill didn't exactly have the protagonist's identity be tied to their heritage, how they grew up, or have some significant element of cultural identity be part of its narrative. You get more wiggle room with that in such a case, as opposed to Dragon Ball, where all of that is a bit more tied into everything.
And the rename isn't that far out of left field. In the novels, Keiji eventually receives the moniker of Killer Cage, which is a pun created from misromanizing his name to mimic other terms his name sounds like. So it's more of an homage.
What is not so much of an homage is how he gets involved in the war, since Keiji was a green new recruit preparing for his first sortie, while Cage, despite holding a military rank, is a non-combatant.
Which brings us to the element which actually utterly wrecked my appreciation of this movie, not even 5 minutes into it. Cage being blackmailed by British General Brigham to be a war correspondent during the invasion of France. The general has committed literally all forces towards this assault, but in a strategy that will leave every single one of them to be slaughtered, wanting Cage there to spin the utterly asinine attack to make him look good, and get the people who will call for his job after his plan of attack and failure to even consider intelligence reports shows him to be utterly incompetent and more of a political military officer, as he doesn't see the obvious trap his entire attack is hinged upon.
For fuck's sake, you're Alistair Mad Eye Moody! Why are you not practicing constant vigilance? This is not the invasion of Normandy, even though the event-wise you are trying to say it is no different from the invasion of Normandy!
General, I am an officer in the United States military. You don't even have the authority.
I have spoken to your CO. You are now under my command.
Why did this movie get good reviews?
Naturally, Cage declines because he is the exact wrong man for the job with zero military training, and can do the job the general wants of him without ever being part of the battle. He is a PR officer with literally no authority over hardened combatants. He's more than willing to help Brigham with exception to that point, and the general knows this.
There is absolutely no logical reason to actually want him there in person. Brigham can see Cage's brewing panic, which would more than likely lead him to spin everything against the man if he goes through with it. He says as much. He can destroy Brigham's career with 6 words if he wanted to.
Don't you think she looks tired?
And if he doesn't survive the battle, then everything he wanted from Cage in the first place, with making him look good in the aftermath, will all be for naught. And you know what he does? Instead of trying to bargain with the man?
Arrest this man.
What?
Stupid! You're so stupid!
This is an epileptic tree of idiocy, and it's all unnecessary. Done solely for the purpose of moving Cage from his lofty safe position to standing amongst the grunts. But done in a way that is multiple tiers of illegal and corrupt, in a movie that from its premise is trying to glorify the military.
Actually, I take that back. There is more of an anti-military subtext in this film with how they present all of these characters. The officers having their heads stuck up their asses so far they can see daylight, refusal to have any capacity for rational or logical thought in favor of just obeying orders, a disdain for anyone that is not of the working class like them, or outright hypocritical cowards. The grunts are all slack-jawed yokels and similarly seen as nothing but disposable pawns with a superficial quirk, all of which ignore signs of things being wrong with them or those around them. They lack entirely a sense of nobility, that these are people doing their best to preserve humanity, but are more along the lines of the dregs of society scripted into fighting against just another army. Oh, and Farrell. How I fucking hate Farrell. Sergeant Farrell, played annoyingly by the recently deceased Bill Paxton in a voice that makes him sound like Ben Browder, is the Sergeant Cage is sent to at the Heathrow military base that proceeds to tell him his life is over. He has been declared a criminal deserter, and also reduced in rank to private, despite being 1. Part of a foreign military this unit has no authority over, 2. Being one of the most recognizable faces in this war's PR machine, so they had to know of him, thus this cover story the generals concocted is bullshit, 3. Deserters don't get shoved out into the field as policy. They get locked up as they become considered to be a danger to themselves and others in such circumstances, at least according to the research I've done. And 4. He was given an illegal order to begin with, and even an uneducated redneck should recognize that.
You're American.
No, sir. I'm from Kentucky.
Well, they did vote against everything America stands for last election, tanked their own economy with the lifting of business restrictions that cleaned them out so badly they're begging for DC handouts, and recently passed a series of state laws that leave their residents with less rights than those living in a third world country. So yeah, that's actually a pretty accurate statement.
These are all things that make me despise this movie, and it's all original material. Again, novel, new recruit, already went through training, scared because it was his first sortie. Here, everyone is an asshole, including the lead character. I can understand wanting a larger contrast between how Cage starts and what he becomes by the film's end, but another failure of this film is to actually capitalize on that as it was in the novel. All you end up seeing Cage do here is become a better soldier. You don't see him become connected to these people through the time spent looping Rita Vrataski. We'll get to her. And even that doesn't develop into anything because it's all one way. And that's because time which could have been spent more with these characters is crowded out for even getting Cruz's character inserted into the action. Hey, here's a thought. Make him a sergeant who lost his platoon and was reduced from command duties back to a grunt due to that trauma, justifying his anxiety at even entering battle and fear of getting connected to others only to lose them again being part of the arc he gets over through the loops. That is more human and relatable and a tangible character evolution that doesn't revolve around just this one woman he develops feelings for, and make that be something that would motivate him to perfect run the loop so everyone lives.
It's like, You put the least amount of effort into anything diverging from the original story, as if you just used focus group data for films from the mid-2000s.
Well, anyways, the next day, Cage is forcibly suited up and, because he doesn't know anything about doing, well, anything, he somehow survives through dumb luck long enough for everyone around him to die, and for him to summarily die after finally getting his weapons to work, shooting a grenade at a giant mimic, in a way that blows him straight to hell as well. Push the button, Frank!
Welcome to hell, Bill. Reliving the worst day of your life? Forever.
As is my common irritant with sci-fi events taking place in a world that has sci-fi movies, Cage and everyone around him are of course entirely genre blind. The shell shock of the deja vu not wearing off until the end of his first loop. However, in that loop, there is one significantly notable occurrence.
Right there. That is the most important scene in the movie and for the time loop scenario. As it shows, despite the repetition of events Cage experiences, his actions can affect the reality around him and the potential future.
Farrell, through much of his asinine introduction, is talking about fate, and how fate is defined by one's own actions.
Private Kimmel, what is my view of gambling in the barracks? Nance, why do I dislike it?
Because it entertains the notion that our fate is in hands other than our own.
And what is my definitive position on the concept of fate?
Through readiness and discipline, we are masters of our fate.
Yeah, it's complete and utter pretentious bullshit, intended to play into how Cage can now change things through his own actions, but forgetting entirely the definition of fate, and a lot of media make the same mistake. It is unknowable until it is already over. It is destiny that is defined by one's own actions having an impact upon the world around you, and it's through defining your own destiny that you can defy fate. Those two words are not synonymous. They never have been.
But that is now the power Cage possesses, living through more loops which bring him up to at least a new recruit's level of ability, until he comes across the movie's leading woman, Rita Vrataski, played by Emily Blunt. Vrataski was the hero of the Battle of Verdun, the only battle in the war humanity's won, and she did it because she had the time loop ability, but lost it after she successfully was able to clear the battle.
Movie Vrataski is also heavily changed from her source counterpart, and likewise not for the better. In the novel, she had also gained the ability to be part of the Mimic's time loop network, and was a more active mentor to Keiji in learning how to properly fight the Mimics off, in hopes of defeating them together by using this ability against them, the two ultimately coming to see each other as equals and, in Keiji's case, fell in love with her.
A fact turned into a straight tragedy in the book because the Mimic's time loop ability works far differently there, as opposed to the film. Only one being with the ability can survive the death of the entity triggering the reset, without just causing the reset signal to be sent to the one in the past to start it all over again. Meaning to end the loops, one of them has to die.
There can be only one.
This is not present in the film, and it massively weakens the character's portrayal, as there is no mutual connection built between the two. While Cage comes to know her, Vrataski doesn't know him. Ever. There's a tragedy to that, sure, but one that goes away intellectually when you realize if he escapes the loops, he can just get to know her like a normal person as she would understand his experience. Whereas, for Keiji to end the loops and save mankind, he ends up needing to kill the woman he loves, that he came to know, and who knew and accepted him in return. They made each other better by being able to interact and support each other in this unending purgatory, and in the movie, after every reset, that is wiped away.
Movie Vrataski is a far less effective character for the reason everyone else is. As she is subject to that reset, she doesn't matter to the story beyond the mentorship role for Cage that, honestly, with how the film presents things, ends up being utterly unneeded, since if he went through enough resets, he would eventually learn everything she did on his own. Though, how she would learn a lot of this crap is baffling, as her following exposition dubbed with rejected knowledgeable scientist cliché number 162 is so ridiculously thorough to be borderline insane. While the novel relied on unverifiable supposition about the Mimics for much of its events due to the cause of all this being an alien race,
and really, when you're fighting a hostile power with such a sci-fi phenomena as a base ability, not knowing the specifics in a scenario where your only tool is trial and error to see if something is true is the smart way to go about this.
The movie phrases this all as being absolute that Vrataski only knows because of visions she was fed, and scientist cliché knows because he studied their carcasses, and had his theories outright rejected because, as said, everyone in the military is asinine. Between the two, they cobbled together the belief that the Mimic's supremacy in this war is due to a hive mind neural network which makes the entire species able to communicate through energy pulses. And it's these energy pulses that allow them to send the time reset signal, by sending such information back to their past self, and then from that reset, acting on that information.
The thing you've got to understand is this is a perfectly evolved, world-conquering organism.
You're an idiot! Species do not evolve to conquer worlds, they evolve survival traits. And I cannot think of a condition in which a species possessing a hive mind like this would evolve the ability to send backups of itself back in time, let alone a silicon-based one that more than likely had to be artificially created. Ugh. For fuck's sake, the worms in Kamen Rider Kabuto were more thought out than this, and that's a series by two people I dislike as writers. The Super Sentai series, Kyoryuger. Its bad guy was a world destroyer, and he was an artificial life form created to have that duty. You are literally being dumber than TV shows written off as being just for kids.
The special mimic Cage encountered is an alpha, one of the mimics able to send the signal when it dies, and through its blood splashing on him, he somehow got the signal ability instead of it, and while he has it, he's effectively hijacked the skill and the mimics can't use it.
Except, there's the problem right there. This ability was passed to Cage by being bled on by an alpha. How does being bled on transfer this ability, which is obviously energy-based?
And furthermore, how does a blood transfusion cause one to lose this ability, as is the reason why she doesn't have it? An ability like this should have nothing to do with blood. Hell, the mimics are a silicon-based life form. How would they even bleed? Him puncturing a structure in an alpha that contains this energy the mimics use for the reset and being irradiated by it so he gains the skill, that makes more sense than being affected by blood he'd never come into contact with again. But the movie makes a big damn deal of blood being the key to this.
I don't know, it feels more like an unnecessary red herring that's part of solely the adaptation, which facilitates depowering them and the mimics trying to draw them into a trap to regain the power to control the reset mechanism. But obviously, since they have other alphas and the mimics do still have their memories sent back every reset, they should still have the means of controlling it.
But nope. The movie now says it's all dependent on Cage and his connection to this system to lead them to the Omega, so they can blow it, end the loops, and sever the mimic's hive mind at the source.
Chosen one narrative is go.
Vrataski gives Cage the ultimate crash course while they wait for him to start having visions to get them to the Omega, with them eventually going through enough loops that they can get off the beach and to a vehicle that they can take to a dam in Germany Cage learns the Omega is stashed in.
Which is where we come to another big problem with the movie tied in how Vrataski's portrayal is weak. Cage's skipping ahead.
While I initially liked the bonding time Cage and Vrataski had in their journey inland, as it was finally downtime in the film to get to know them as people, because of Cage looping, it's eventually revealed that all his questions were leading to answers he already knew, not trying to get the audience to know her better, but himself. He then tells us, and thus we are not privy to the intricacies of the story and the insight into what makes the characters tick. We are only permitted an outsider's perspective instead of getting to know them like Cage is over the many, many, many loops. Why she's so emotionally detached is she was stuck in the loops a lot longer and, to mimic Keiji in the novel, as part of escaping the loops at Verdun, she lost someone she got attached to. But due to a blood transfusion after the battle ended, she lost the ability before she could reset it one last time for a perfect run.
Essentially, Cage's story could have been hers had she not botched it. Now it's up to a real man to do it right. While she's so obsessed with getting revenge of the Omega, she's short-sighted even for someone without the ability to see a day into the future.
And that is shown as they crash at a farmhouse that just so happens to have a helicopter fueled up and back that they can use to get to the dam. That Cage has been to before, only for him to not tell her any of this, as he is more interested in her than the mission at this point, where she keeps getting killed and, as is shown, she won't listen to him.
This reveal really does undermine all of this. As it's progressing from context about her, we're not allowed to see, despite, again, her being the female lead the main character is trying to get to know. This should have been the first loop on this path we get to see, so it doesn't have the implication of him manipulating her to reveal more about herself, as opposed to her starting to connect to him and deciding to open up on her own. This shifts away the perception of her being an equal, and more of something to be won over with the right secret code.
As while her death at the end of this scene, as he said would happen, is powerful, it's nowhere near as effective as if this had been the first loop they got this far, only for it to all go wrong. Then show more attempts with the same result, which would more clearly follow his rage and breaking from her for her own good and taking the trip solo as we are next allowed to see him doing. Time constraints, yes, but this was clearly planned from the beginning with how the dialogue flows from all these scenes. Cage gets to the dam, and it's a trap. As said, they want to drain the ability right out of Cage's head so he can't reset the day and they would then win. Meaning he's wasted the last God knows how long, when the real answer was staring them in the faces. Scientist Cliché, when studying the mimics, built a device that can allow them to hack into the mimic neural network. But for some reason, it only works on alphas.
It's an untested device. How would you possibly know that? Shouldn't jacking this into any mimic allow them to access the hive mind since the other mimics get signals from it? Hell, that's a safer strategy than what they actually do. Go about jacking Cage into it because the energy signal is in his blood?
Yeah, this is another way the blood thing doesn't make sense to me. It's something that reads energy signals like a brain. Obviously it needs to jack into his brain to actually work. Though getting it takes us back to General Moody to get Scientist Cliché's hacking device because it was confiscated. There's some decent schadenfreude against the General for earlier, as Cage literally predicts every action he takes until he finally gives them the device, only for him to again be a total douche out of nowhere and call for security to chase them down, despite everything that should have at least allowed them to give them the benefit of the doubt due to how impossible all of that would have been otherwise. It's a repetition of actions and his earlier backwards conduct that, while consistent for the character, continues to make no goddamn sense within the framework of this man being in any way a competent individual.
Furthermore, why did they confiscate Scientist Cliché's device anyways if they thought he was a crackpot and dismissed him? If it didn't work, it would be harmless to them and everyone else.
Well, because of this, due to Cage jacking himself in, he does learn the Omega's location under the Louvre in Paris, but also ends up bleeding out so badly that when the military police crash their car, he ends up needing a transfusion, meaning he's out, and they are screwed.
Now, obviously, they needed to do this to drive up the tension in the final act and reestablish the consequences of death for the characters, but because this movie has spent so little time with them, we don't care about these characters. It's just been event, action, beat, beat, beat.
Thus, while Cage can tell J-Squad, remember them, a hell of a lot of things they've never told anyone else to get their trust at dealing a transport, we didn't connect to any of them, nor were once more shown Cage connecting to them. So once again, his knowledge comes out of nowhere from a supposedly lived past loop, instead of showing us that loop or a montage of downtime loops in between the other events to justify this, leaving the lot of them, as I said, to be nothing more than cannon fodder, and just as worthless to actually assisting them in getting to the Omega. To the point you could literally edit around them even being present in this part of the movie, as I am doing right now.
Hell, they had absolutely zero role or impact in the movie, despite the first act making a big deal out of them, and Pharrell, and seeing them occasionally spotted in the loops, when they never really mattered and went to a waste.
Anyways, Cage and Vrataski make it to the Louvre, and with a mass of mimics on their tail, manage to bury the area to buy some time, and Vrataski choosing to sacrifice herself, so Cage can swim down to the Omega, succeeding in sending a bandolier of grenades into it to blow it to hell. Game over!
What?
Yeah, somehow by bathing in the Omega's blood as he died, Cage got one last reset to slightly earlier than the backup. But I think because the Mimic hive mind died in the future, it A, didn't come back with him, so the hive mind is permanently disrupted. B, Cage got the root reset power, so the Mimics have lost it entirely, thus all their future knowledge is nulled, so they're disoriented. Or C, due to the timing of the reset, the hive mind's cascading failure hitched a ride back and left them all brain dead. Any way around it, the war is pretty much over. And so, the movie ends with Cage going to see Vrataski.
Yes? What do you want?
That's seriously how you're ending this? Not even a coda?
So as you can probably tell, I don't like this movie. But the time loop aspect of the story is the least of its problems. Until the ending Deus Ex Machina reset button that's exceedingly ambiguous and obviously done to give the film a happy ending, the entire thing is completely consistent on its rules and execution of the premise. It was not at all what held back my enjoyment of the film.
When I've gone over such in the Japanese media I review, my issue has always been that time travel is often used inconsistently, that they change the rules and don't recognize what is and what is not viable within the setting, even with the time alterations. Final Fantasy XIII-2 and Lightning Returns never nailed down their rules for the time manipulation, and when you mark down the timeline, there were all points of direct contradiction written off by time travel, even though time travel should not have affected those things. Superhero Tyson Grand Prix had wide-sweeping changes to time, while directly ignoring how those changes would affect everything, following it to just skip to the changed modern setting that still contained things which could no longer exist in it. Onimusha Demon Siege didn't reflect the shifting nature of time as more than a gameplay element to facilitate dual protagonists, so didn't have the events in both eras affect personal time streams. All of these are for the most part avoided here.
Now, my issue is how stupid everyone acts, and the ridiculousness of how the time looping ability gets started. I have no idea how the film was reviewed so well when, once again in a Hollywood movie, the characters required to get a story going are too brain dead to have the positions which facilitate such. And this is not a good adaptation of All You Need Is Kill as a result of that.
Much of the praise as I looked up the critical buzz about this film revealed that the critics loved the movie because this is not an idea that they had seen done before. Except it is an idea that has been done before all the time in science fiction. The things they loved about the movie were things taken from the original novel and its approach to the reset button. While the original things done for the movie that I have more focused on why it undermines the overall story, we're also seeing similar weak points to it. But since I have seen this done before, I don't see the overall appeal to it as opposed to going back to Groundhog Day, or Window of Opportunity, or Star Trek's many time travel episodes, or Farscape's Unrealized Reality, or the Haruhi Suzumiya Endless 8 arc.
Or obviously the original freaking novel.
Apparently there's a sequel in planning for this film, with the screenwriter flat out admitting their work for this one didn't deserve all the praise it got. Though, in their phrasing of it, the sequel is, quote, much better than the original film, and, quote, it will revolutionize how people make sequels. And, it's a sequel! That's a prequel!
In other words, it's likely to be crap, as they have already exhausted anything from the original source material that was interesting, and their changes from those premises was what made this film unappealing in the first place. It's far from the worst Japanese media adaptation I've seen. It's okay as a popcorn flick, but it's just not for me.